Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Felicia Harris, and I am the marketing partner with the African American Chamber of Commerce, and we are excited to have everyone with us today. Before we get started, I am going to pass the mic to our president and CEO, Regina A. Harrison. I just wanted to go over the run of show briefly so you know what to expect this morning. We are being true to the time schedule. As you see, we started exactly at 8:30. We are very mindful that our members are running businesses, and so we want to respect your time. So right after our president does welcome remarks, we'll also have some brief remarks by our chairman of the board, Stephen Scott Bradley, and we will dive into our intimate conversation with City Controller Rebecca Rhynhart. If we have time at the end, we will be allowing members to raise their hands to ask a question, or you can drop any questions at any time in the chat. We are monitoring the chat. All of the questions that you submitted during registration were received, and we have done our best to consolidate and make sure that all of those questions were included in today's conversation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Regina A. Harrison, President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning. Thank you, Felicia, for providing those instructions. Welcome, African American Chamber members. It is so good to have you with us here this morning. And today we are kicking off our inaugural Reimagine, Reset, and Reinvest for a Sustainable Future and our Influencers Breakfast with the Honorable Rebecca Rhynhart. We did a listening tour and you said this is what you wanted to see in programming. So we stood it up for you. So thank you for being with us this morning to have this important conversation on finances and the vaccine. And with that, I will bring on Stephen Scott Bradley to introduce our special guest this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And again, we're excited to start this series, and we're excited to welcome Rebecca Rhynhart as our first guest today. Interesting fact about Rebecca is not only is she the controller of the city of Philadelphia, but she graduated from Middlebury College in Vermont. So we're excited to have Rebecca, and I don't want to take any thunder away from her, but she's a friend of the chamber. She's a friend of mine, and she's always engaging. So Rebecca, we welcome you, and let's hear your presentation this morning.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's great to be here. Great to see you virtually, at least, and great to be here. I'm truly honored and excited for the conversation this morning. So I'll just say a few words about myself for those of you who don't know me. I ran for office in 2017. I was a first-time candidate and ran against a long-term incumbent. And I ran on a platform of change of we need to manage the city's finances better. The government needs to actually work for people of the city. And I am idealistic in that I believe government can work, but we need good people to lead it. And I ran on that platform, was not expected to win by people who said they knew about politics. But I did, and I won with 58% of the vote. And I think what that said and continues to say is that people want change and want our government to work. So I took office in 2018, hit the ground running, using both the audit and investigative powers of my office to call out wasteful spending, to make recommendations for improvement, and to push for change in how our city government operates. So I've also, in addition to the audit function and the investigative function, I've expanded the role, the traditional role of the city controller's office into issues that have social justice impact. And I feel that everyone has a role to play in making our city work for all of us. And my office has done work around gun violence, best practices, evidence-based programs, strategies that work to combat and get the gun violence down. And I look forward to leaning in on other issues as we move forward to my next term, hopefully. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I know there's supposed to be a Q&A today. So wanted to have a brief introduction, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you, Madam Controller. We want to dive into what our members have asked us to discuss this morning. Now, you released a report in March regarding the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on the tax revenues. And the mayor proposed his budget, I think it was last Thursday. He proposed a $5.19 billion budget.
Mm-hmm.
Can you walk us through your scenarios and how they line up with the mayor's budget, if they do or if they don't?
Sure. So my office's analysis and report on COVID's impact on our tax revenues showed that to date, the city has lost about $450 million of tax revenue due to COVID and the impact of the shutdown, both the impact of the restaurants and hospitality and small businesses being shut, and also the impact of the lost wage tax from non-residents not commuting and working in the city during this time. And then what we projected moving forward was that we projected a pessimistic and an optimistic scenario. What we are showing is that the city, in a pessimistic scenario, could be down an additional 250 to 280 million in the next year. So overall, there is a significant impact to COVID. The good news, so the 450 plus the 280, we're looking at over 700 million in impact. The good news is that this federal stimulus package was very generous to local governments across the country. And the city of Philadelphia is set to get $1.4 billion. Obviously, 1.4 billion is bigger than the 700 million I just mentioned in terms of a budget hole. So what the stimulus can allow the city to do is to really make targeted investments in strategic areas to lift our city up. Okay. The mayor's, and in addition to the 1.4 billion that the city is getting, the school district is getting an additional 1 billion on top of that. And that money comes in the first tranche, the first half of it comes in this May. The second half of that comes in next May. The mayor's proposed budget last week, what it does is it takes the stimulus and puts it into the general fund budget. And basically, there's increases in a lot of areas in the budget from what it looked like in a pandemic budget. But it's not, the ARP, the American Rescue Plan money is not separated out to truly, in the way I think it should be, to show what the investments are and what the strategic impact is going to be to move our city forward. So in terms of the rescue plan money, my office will be putting something out in the coming weeks on the rescue plan money that the city's expected to get, and to propose a framework to budget for and use that money. I mean, the way I look at it, the mayor's proposed budget is a proposal, and he announced it last week, and then city council has their turn to evaluate it and make changes to it before final passage at the end of June.
That's interesting. I've followed your reports for years, and you always seem to focus on that money should be segregated and not all in the general fund. So we do look forward to seeing how you plan to audit that and track those funds and see if they're really making the investment that the budget proposes. And with that being said, you also mentioned in your report that a lot of this is dependent upon the vaccine and how widely it's distributed across Philadelphia. Do you have a sense of where we are with that vaccine distribution and a projected reopening for businesses based on what you're seeing?
Well, on that, I do follow what the governor and also the health commissioner here are saying and leading, but the vaccine has become much more available and accessible. I know there are now appointments that are going unfilled at the convention center and other sites. So there is a big push to get our city and our state vaccinated. And in terms of a full reopening, I think I'm waiting along with everyone else in terms of not 100% knowing when that is going to happen. We definitely can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. And it's about how soon we can convince the people that haven't been vaccinated and make sure it's accessible to everyone that doesn't have transportation, and that we get that herd immunity. So I think I, like many other people, have been sort of awaiting this and looking at this every day to say, when can we open our economy? Because obviously it's been such a huge strain on our, especially small businesses across Philadelphia. My office did a 4-part series on COVID's impact on small business, and it showed that COVID has had a tremendous impact and a disparate impact on Black and brown businesses compared to white-owned businesses. We also found that the federal PPP program in Philadelphia was given disproportionately in white neighborhoods. So obviously issues that need to be strategically solved.
When we think about that, the disproportionate distribution of the PPP, and we think about the Controller's Office, and for our members that are with us today and they want to know how can they best interact with your office? What is the role of the Controller's Office as it relates to African American businesses in the city of Philadelphia?
Great question. So the city charter role of the city controller, the legal role is as the chief auditor of the city, independently elected, fiscal watchdog, and auditor over all city departments. In addition to that, my office, according to the city charter, works to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. And so on that end, my office also has an investigative function. We have a unit that investigates fraud and that takes action on that front. So those are the traditional roles. Beyond that, I've created an office of policy analysis and data, which does data analysis, such as the report on COVID's impact on small business across Philadelphia and the work around gun violence. And my vision for my office going beyond the traditional work is that the financial knowledge that I have and that my office has needs to be used to fight for and push for equity and outcome across neighborhoods in our city and to combat the structural racism that exists. So that unit in my office has a specific focus around equity in everything that it does. So to your question, because I just realized I've been talking and not getting to your question, Regina, so I apologize.
Take time.
To your question of how to your members best interact with my office. So we have a website, controller.phila.gov, which is a great resource of information, which has all these different reports for businesses on it. And then also if there's any problem, any contractor issue or anything, there's also a fraud and investigative hotline, and we investigate if contractors, for example, are saying they're using a Black and brown business for a subcontractor, but they're not. And we have held up payments. My office does have the ability to stop payment on vendors that are not upholding what they've agreed to uphold. And so we've done that. So there's a few different ways that businesses can interact. And also I'm right now looking at how to improve the ease of doing business in Philadelphia, because it's so difficult to do business. So I would be interested in feedback in that regard from businesses about what needs to change in Philly, among Philly government, to better encourage business growth and entrepreneurship in this city. Because job growth in Philadelphia has been, before COVID, about 1.4% per year, which is decent, but it's below average for a large city. And I mean, just by way of comparison, a city such as Austin or Nashville, they have job growth of 3.5 to 4.2% a year. I'm not saying we necessarily want that, because there's issues with that as well, but it would be great if we can get over 2% per year. And the way to do that would be to actually encourage small business growth. And I think we have a long way to go. So I would love input in that regard as well.
So that's very interesting that you bring that up. We, the different chambers, we've testified before City Council on the ease of doing business in Philadelphia. And one thing that is central to our members is this whole thing around capital, right? So our members, as we saw from the PPP loan allocation, capital is the main barrier for businesses, for Black businesses. So when you do have the opportunity to get a contract with the city, being paid on time is paramount. And being able to keep your staff, being able not to use line of credit. And that seems to be something that eludes the city of Philadelphia, is being able to get those businesses paid on time. What's your opinion about that? How can we shorten that window? Great question.
And this is something I worked on from within the government when I worked. I was one thing I didn't say is I held various positions within city government for two mayors, for both Mayor Nutter and Mayor Kenny, before resigning, which I needed to do to run for office. And in the 1 year, the year of 2016, I was chief administrative officer of the city, and I oversaw procurement. And that's the year I really got to know Stephen Scott Bradley as well, because that issue of how long it takes to pay is really honestly ridiculous, to be quite frank. And we got that down. Basically, what happens is a vendor is selected, a company is selected to do business. They get a letter from the city, and maybe some of those on the call have had this experience. Get a letter from the city, notice to proceed, saying you got the deal. You have the business. The city directs you to start the work. So you start the work. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But behind the scenes, there still needs to be a contract signed. And often in the city, it takes like 6 months to get a contract done. And the contract needs to get done before the payment goes out the door. So then the work is done. Let's say the work is done in 2 months and the city's invoiced. Well, then that invoice sits on someone's desk for 4 months until the contract is signed. That's dysfunctional.
I'm out
And
of business by now, Controller.
Sorry?
The business is shuttered. The business is shuttered by the time.
I know. It's really ridiculous. So it is something I worked on in that year, and we cut that, we cut the time down by, 40 days or so, but then I left. I'm not sure what happened to that initiative when I ran for office. I do think that there has to be a way for the city to solve that. And that is under the mayor. It is an administrative function. I can't direct that change, but there has to be a way to say, one, if you have a small business, a minority owned business, perhaps there's a special unit in the law department that does their contracts on a faster speed than, say, the contract renewal for PICO. And nothing against PICO, but I don't think that PICO needs the money for operations every week the way, and I just use PICO as an example, so I apologize if PICO's on the phone, but compared to a small business. So there has to be a solution if the city truly cares about this. And that's something that I do think needs to change. And, it's on the city to change. It's a problem.
Yeah, totally agree. So I just want to move back into taxes for a minute. So in the mayor's budget, there's an accelerated BIRT tax reduction, but it's very small, very incremental. Can you talk about the uniformity clause, why we can't tax commercial property and residential property the same, and how those incremental tax cuts will affect the overall budget and doing business in Philadelphia?
Sure. So the uniformity clause is state law that says that the city can't tax different types of property entities differently. So can't have a higher property tax on commercial than on residential, or a higher tax on one group than on another. In terms of the city's tax structure, though, I mean, it's been pretty well documented that our tax structure is high, right? And that, we were recently ranked 71st out of 80 North American cities on the ease of doing business by Arizona State University. That's pretty bad. And part of that is the red tape around business. It takes 10 days to open a business in Philadelphia. It takes 1 day in Austin, for example. But it also is about taxation, and our tax structure is very high. We have on businesses, as many of the businesses know on the that are on the Zoom today, there's the business income and receipts tax taxes gross receipts of a business and also taxes profits, and then also makes businesses prepay the second year of expected profit before they've even earned it. It's really difficult, especially for small businesses, and it's something that does need to change. The tax proposals, the reductions are, the mayor proposed are relatively small, as you mentioned, on the BERT reduction. I think that we need to end this prepayment of the second year of profit tax, because that makes no sense to make a business pay the second year of expected profit ahead of time. And what I've heard from small businesses is that prevents them from hiring an extra person or two if they have some profit, because they have to pay a double tax. So I think that we need to look at our overall tax structure and say, how do we encourage small and medium-sized business growth? And what changes do we need to make in the tax structure in order to be more business friendly for small and medium-sized businesses? And when I looked at what we as a city, I wasn't part of this, but I'm just saying the royal we as a city, were willing to give away to get Amazon here, all those tax breaks. I feel like we should put that same energy into saying, well, what do we need to do to encourage organic, authentic business growth across our entire city? So I think that's important. And I also think that other non-tax revenue sources such as pilots, payment in lieu of taxes, do need to be looked at as part of that conversation about how do we best get revenue to run our city while at the same time allowing our businesses to grow, to increase job growth, to give more opportunity to the people of our city to get good paying jobs, which is a win-win for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that's a great segue into our next topic. Before I see there are quite a few questions in the chat, but before we get to that, as you look ahead for your next term, what are some of the things, you've mentioned a few, that you plan to focus on?
Going into my next term, what I'm hoping to do is a few different things. One is continue to take tough stances on issues that need to be looked at. We are planning an audit of the police department spend starting this summer. And what we plan to do with that is to look at really best practices for how do we reimagine police spending to ensure safety and true safety for everyone. I think that we need a roadmap going forward on that front. And my office got a request in from several members of council to look at police, and we discussed internally. And I think that is an area that we absolutely can add value and vision in that regard. We also have an audit going on in the sheriff's office for the custodial accounts there. And then I'll continue to do the work around transparency and also around issues of diversity in hiring among city departments. When I came to office, we added a section, a subject matter in our departmental audit, our annual departmental audit, which focuses on the diversity of the new hires of that department, and for every single department. And my goal there is to have the scrutiny on departments across the city to increase diversity so that our workforce truly looks like and represents our city's population. And we've also added a section to that audit, which then asks each department if they're using best practices in diverse hiring. So for at-will employees, which is making sure the job description is posted, make sure you're recruiting, make sure you're interviewing diverse candidates and having a diverse interview panel to counter implicit bias. So I want to continue the work on that front as well to really make our city government work better. So all of that and then some. I want to do all of that.
Well, we certainly appreciate an eye towards equity. And with that, I'm going to look in the chat. There is a question, is there one overriding body that checks on things like the distribution of PPP or stimulus dollars and how they are distributed fairly to all businesses? Who handles this primarily?
So the Commerce Department handles their loan programs. The federal PPP program was just administered through the federal program. And what we also found in the federal PPP program is the largest benefactor of the PPP program in Philadelphia were law firms, which I'm not saying that law firms don't need help, but when you look at who needs it the most, I don't think that any of us would say law firms. So in general, but it is the Commerce Department looks at it from their perspective, and then we also evaluate it as the fiscal watchdog. I think it's very important to keep scrutiny on the distribution of money, because the recovery money should disproportionately be going to Black and brown businesses in disadvantaged neighborhoods, because that's who's most impacted by COVID. So any other formula for giving the money away doesn't make sense. And we need to be strategic, really strategic about it. And that's what I want to use my office as a force in that regard.
And this has been a very valuable conversation for our members. And I think we have about a minute left. Felicia, do you want to see if anyone wants to raise their hand for one last question?
Sure. Right now, no one has their hand raised, but if you use the hand raise function, oh, here we go. We have Jacqueline Wiggins. Jacqueline, I have unmuted your mic so that you can ask your question. Okay, Jacqueline, you are unmuted. Did you want to ask your question? Okay, I think Jacqueline may be having a technical issue with the mic. Right now, we do not have anyone else with their hand raised, but we do, I'm not sure, Regina, if you saw in the question and answer.
I see a question in the chat. How have the discussions about forming a public bank in Philadelphia been going? I know Council Member Derek Green introduced legislation around that. Do you want to give your thoughts on a public bank?
Sure. So the issue of the public bank has been proposed as a way for the city to have more control over giving out loans, not paying high fees to Wall Street. And I think that the idea does have merit. I think what we have to watch out for in creating any new public entity is to make sure that it's truly governed by people that have banking and financial experience and expertise, and that it doesn't become another patronage spot for that we've seen happen too often in Philadelphia's history. So I think those are the concerns. So there needs to be really strong safeguards, protections, bylaws, and requirements for those in charge of the money there. But I do think that there's a good, healthy discussion around that, and we'll see what happens.
Awesome. I think I saw a hand, and then it is 9:02. So we know the controller has to get back to doing the business of the controller's office. Stephen Scott Bradley for the last question.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to thank you for your time and, frankness today. I mean, I thought the conversation and the dialogue has been very engaging. So I just wanted to continue for being accessible to the members of the chamber and the communities of colored business owners. So I just wanted to express my gratitude.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. And it's great to be here. I appreciate you and your members for your contributions and involvement in the city and the work you do. So I'm here for you. And we have to keep pushing to make it work better.
Great.
City to work better.
Well, with that, I am going to end today's Influencers Breakfast. Thank you, City Controller Rebecca Rhynhart. We are going to have you back to continue this conversation. Thank you to the members, and thank you to the AACC team for putting on an amazing event today. With that, everyone, please have a great day.
Thanks so much, Regina. Thanks, Stephen. See you soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.